Today's episode is sponsored by Rev, the productivity powerhouse for content creators, journalists, market researchers, and more. Capture audio from anywhere, get AI-powered summaries and quotes, and leave security worries behind with Rev. Whether you're on the go or in the office, Rev's got you covered. Discover more at rev.com. Hi, I'm Kendall Kelton, and I'm your host today on The Rough Draft. Featuring honest conversations with folks from across the creative industry, The Rough Draft explores the creative process, tools, and resources used by some of the best in the business. From journalists to content creators and business leaders, we shed light on what it looks like to break into the industry, make mistakes, collaborate with others, and the essential tools that help us all along the way. This week, I'm talking with Alain Stephens, a staff writer at The Trace, an organization of investigative journalists covering gun violence. Alain specifically reports on developments in firearms technology and the ATF. And as a military veteran and gun owner, his work has led to really important public safety, civil rights, and criminal justice reform. In this episode, Alain breaks down his process for creating impactful investigative pieces. Investigative reporting seems like such a process, and where you're always learning new things, having to absorb a lot of information. And so, you mentioned earlier on that, you would go do all the research, throw the 100 pages down when you needed to. But now, what is your typical approach when you first start developing a story idea? Is it going right to the data? Is it going into the community? Can you kind of give us a little bit of detail into how you get going?
Yeah. This is one of the things I always talk about with movies and stuff, that movies never get investigative reporters correct. And I want to get with the director because they always have this thing where it's these lofty inquiring minds being we don't know what's going on. And we're just going to go out here and explore and ask questions and be I never,
Yeah.
And I'm no, we're just like you guys, right? Here's the thing.
Yeah.
We know people are messing up. We know where they're typically messing up. We know where the rumors are. So we know who's that person's slimy. The question is, how can we prove it, right? That's what we're kind of sitting around talking about.
Yeah.
How can we prove it, right?
Yeah.
And so I tell people, right, if you know there is a vault, right, and there's proofing information within that vault, and you know where that is, right? And the conversation isn't if that damning information exists, but instead, how do you acquire it? That movie is a heist. And that's what we do. I look at this. What do Americans want to know? And that, right, is not only an inquiry of going out into the streets and, seeing what information or problems exist, but also just talking to people about the problems, regular people about the problems. One of the things is that if I brought up, say, a topic of gun violence to you, I find that regular people have way more interesting questions about this topic than I ever, would kind of predict to write up, right? The second thing I do is I write for kind of a global type of audience, I'm writing to a space alien almost. If I always tell people that for Americans it's hard for us to understand gun violence because it's trying to describe, the outside of a car when you have been born, raised, and lived inside the car your entire life.
Yeah. Everyone has like you had previously said, everybody has vastly different experiences with guns.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so I think sometimes the best way to do it is to almost just write on for a Wikipedia page for a nobody person reading this 100 years in the future. How do we get here? And then we get kind of more specific. Okay, is there any documentation out there that can answer, prove, right? Is there any sort of data, right, that could show this?
Yeah. I want to talk a bit about the challenges though, like that you are seeing. Is it challenges in funding? Like you just said, like nobody is like funding for somebody to actually do longer form investigations on these important issues. Is it that speed? What do you think is like the biggest challenges right now for journalists?
Yeah, I mean, so the first thing is the 24-hour news cycle is like, which is a creation of the media industry, is antithetical to good journalism. I think even longitudinally, like when we look at it, the journalism industry has contracted, and that contraction probably has actually gone simultaneously with the invention of the 24-hour news cycle. And also, if we probably looked at the levels of American distrust, it probably also coincides with the, rise of the 24-hour news cycle. And it kind of makes sense. I'm very, very self-critical of my own industry. I think a lot of journalists are like, oh, well, who cares if a third of the country is just like too dumb to get it? Like, no, that number's too high for me. Like, we have to start looking internally and being like, where are we making mistakes? And like, what are we doing? Part of it is systemic. Like I just told you that, every damn editor I speak to knows, oh, that's a good story and I wish we could do this, but we gotta feed the beast. And I'm like, kill the beast. And no one has the guts to do it. Like no one has the guts to just be like, listen, maybe the best type of news show and maybe the best thing we need is just like, the 1 hour weekly show, the once a night show that has really quality news. And the thing is people have responded to that. People still, people are like, you're crazy, Alain. And I'm like, call me crazy, but YouTube's cleaning you up. Right? You think that like, no one wants news anymore? That's a lie. These people on YouTube have low overhead and they're doing news that is citations and everything else just as quality. And people are gravitating to them because they're doing stuff in depth and in niche, and they're doing the opposite of what you're doing, and they're stealing your audience. And so, and same with podcasts and stuff too. So I tell the legacy people, like, don't be so high and mighty that people have to listen to you because you have a legacy banner head. And don't be so high and mighty that people don't want to listen to you because they're just too stupid to get it. The fact of the matter is you're talking about stuff that's not particularly irrelevant. You're not spending time and quality on it. And the other thing that I found early on as an investigative reporter, and this is what jades so many other ones, is that you think you would have these editors, right, that are like, you're special forces, you're paid to go out there and fight the war. You have our full blown support. Here's the company credit card. Here's the attorneys, whatever you need, go do it. And while that happens, and the best investigative reports probably in the world does happen, I also tell people that a great deal of being a successful investigative reporter is advocacy internally. I tell people that if you want to see a movie with a character that's an amazing investigative reporter, Jessica Chastain from Zero Dark 30 is probably the most quintessential reporter because she stays on it for a long time, right? On the Bin Laden, chase. But half the movie is her kind of explaining to a bunch of men why she needs to get the right resources to do her damn job. And that is so much of like what I'm doing. I tell people like, investigative reports also don't fall off trees. Like, you get what you pay for. So if you pay for, 10 or whatever, awesome, hackers and data reporters and editors, and you put together some awesome team, you're going to get good stuff. Right.
Well, speaking of really impactful stories, one of your most important investigations was a story you worked on, which uncovered what was happening behind the scenes in the U.S. with police departments selling their weapons. And this investigation in particular had such a far-reaching impact. So I'm going to dig into that with you on our next episode.
Let's do it.
Well, that's it for today's episode of The Rough Draft. Be sure to rate and subscribe in order to stay up to date with the latest episodes, and visit rev.com/podcasts for even more content. Thank you for listening, and we look forward to seeing you again on the next episode of The Rough Draft.